are in the household toilet that we used for, well, we're still using actually. It belongs to a temporary house that we put up when we first moved onto our land. As I've said before, we used another toilet for when we first moved onto the land, but as that filled up and we wanted to have something more comfortable, something that we could get to in the night without having to get wet and muddy, and something that would last longer. So we built this, and it's kind of attached to the temporary house with a covered deck. So it's easy to get to. This is quite a big room, and that's because it has two chambers, two IBCs for the poo, one under there and one under here. And where some of the time there's a seat open where I'm sitting with one IBC underneath, and then that one filled up, took a couple of years, and then we moved on to the other one and opened this seat up. I've experimented with a different separating system here. That's the same one as we have in the campsite. So it's the metal sheet based on the Natsol toilets. What I found here was, because the urine goes out that way and I hadn't designed it for this kind of a separator, I was trying to retrofit it into an empty tank, but trying to fit it around a structure I'd already built. So the urine pipe that it feeds into didn't have a very good slope on it, and the urine tended to pool there. So that has made it a bit smelly. The other general thing I'd say about that separating system is the surface area that you have urine on is quite big. So that potentially might make it smelly anyway. Whereas with the separate one, you've just got the little tube, and you can put a valve over the top to stop smells coming back up. So it's maybe easier to stop that one from being smelly. This chamber is currently very, very full. I normally would have stopped using it sooner, but I've been really busy. That determines quite a lot of what I do. So it's very, very full. The heap is quite hot, and that means when you lift the lid up, you get a bit of a blast of warmth, which is a bit weird if you're not used to it. And it also means that any smells that are in there are going to get carried into the room. So it's fine. Here now, I can't smell anything, but if I lift the lid up, I will be able to smell it. And probably in the next day or two, I'm going to open this chamber up, and then it should be fine. It shouldn't smell for quite a long time. This chamber I emptied recently, and it was the first IBC container full of poo that I've emptied. It was about 20 months since the last poo went in when I emptied it, and we're going to take a look at that, because we can go around the back and look at the chamber and also look at the whole poo composting process. Issues we've had with this toilet, there've been some interesting ones. One is that although we haven't really had a big problem with rats in any of the other ones, rats have definitely liked this toilet, and that's quite uncomfortable in that you really don't want a rat walking on poo and then walking anywhere else. It's a really unpleasant thought. There's not been any sign they've come into the room, and they actually come in the back and then go down the hole that we've made for the seat, because the IBC container it's difficult to make all the holes rat proof. So that's definitely where they were coming in, and the new house toilet is definitely going to be rat proof. Don't want rats anywhere near poo. Another issue relating to the rats, which is a really weird one, when we were using this side, we had a white toilet seat, and at that point we'd just leave the seat open all the time, and that never was an issue with smell. It didn't smell or anything, it was fine. But it was a white toilet seat, and in July 2016 we had a lot of chiggers or harvest mites in the campsite, in one of the campsites, just on one particular weekend only, and the campers all got covered in bites, and it was actually some campers who discovered what it was that was biting them, because I'd never even heard of them before. And a few weeks after that, I started noticing lots of little dots on the top of the white toilet seat that was open. And after a while, I scraped them off and looked at them under the microscope, and they looked like they were harvest mites, and we were also getting bitten, which is quite an unpleasant thought, and I had to think about how to deal with them. And I think they will have got in because they're parasites, and what parasites like that do is they in the wild, they walk to the top of a blade of grass or to the top of a leaf, and they wait for an animal to walk past. The animal brushes past, they get on them, and then they attach themselves to them. Chiggers actually attach themselves to people or birds or whatever it is for about 3 days. So it's a very specific short period, but you get quite a red, itchy bite from them. But one of the reasons why I was fairly sure it was chiggers is because they were walking to the top of the toilet seat. They were looking for somewhere high where they could be brushed off onto something they could attach themselves to. And I thought really hard about how to deal with it. And in the end, I took the toilet seat and everything off, and I was left with the IBC container with the hole that I'd cut for the poo to go through. And I smeared fruit tree grease in a really good thick band all the way around the inside of the hole, so that because chiggers walk, they can't fly or anything like that. So anything walking up the sides on the inside would come to the fruit tree grease, which is designed to stay sticky and stop insects walking over it, would get stuck and wouldn't be able to get past. And it worked. So that was fantastic. It was such a relief because that was quite an uncomfortable, weird problem that we hadn't anticipated and I haven't heard about anywhere else. Other than that, this toilet has been incredibly effective. And although it's smelly now when I take the lid off, I know why it's smelly. I know it's because it's too full. It's because the urine is getting caught and sitting in the pipe. So all of it is things that I can change for the future. Another thing I would say is the stainless steel separating system, I think, is much better for public use, because in a household toilet, it's going to get much more use. Well, I don't know, the campsite toilet gets a lot during the summer, but it's easier to make it smell less, like I said, with the other separating system, just because of the surface area of urine. But, and also if you have a separator that we looked at before, the blue one, if you have people using it all the time, you can teach everyone how to use it. That's not a problem. But in a public place, people aren't going to learn that kind of thing just to use the toilet for a weekend while they're camping. So for public use, you kind of have to think, this is what people actually do, and then design the toilet fit in with that. You can't really, there's a limit to how much you can expect people to change their behaviour. And another aspect of that, which I've mentioned before, is all the toilets up to this point, other than the campsite one, which I hadn't built when this one was built, men have had to sit down to pee. So for compost toilets, it is quite a good idea to have a separate urinal for men. And that's something we will be doing in the new house toilet. Another problem we had with this toilet, very briefly, was at the end of one summer, we started to have a fly problem. And that's not something, we have had a fly problem in the campsite toilet, which I talked about before, and that's obviously we know why. But here it was less clear why, and there was about a month where it seemed like flies were going to be a problem. And because with a big chamber that everyone's using all the time, you're really committed, I was quite anxious about that. And the way I dealt with it here was to go to the hole at the back, rake the heap as flat as I could, put newspaper in, drop newspaper in so it formed a flat surface with really good overlaps as far as I could. And access is a little tricky, so partly I was doing that by dropping it through here and partly at the back. And then I put loads of sawdust in over the whole thing. And I did that probably twice, and the flies stopped being a problem, but it may have been because it got colder as well, because it was sort of late summer getting into autumn and we started getting frosts. The other thing I did was the stink pipes for carrying the smell out. I had never covered them with anything because we'd never had a fly problem, but I covered them with a little bit of netting just so that no flies could get in them, and any flies that were in them would buzz around the top and die and fall back in. But we stopped having a problem. I was worried it would come back the next year and it just didn't. So that was okay. well, something different that we did in this toilet. We were moving away from carrying the 25-litre containers of urine. Not a good job. Definitely best avoided. So for this toilet, we have a separate IBC for urine, which is outside. And I know that the water table rises up here a bit in the winter, and I had to dig it in because obviously the urine, it has to be lower than the lowest point that the urine is running off from the toilet. So I will go outside and have a look in a bit, but I put a pipe in to carry any excess water off from around it so that it would never get lifted up if it's empty in the winter and the water table rises. Because with the IBC containers, I now have a system of pipes that carries the urine all the way down to our compost heaps. Much better than lugging the 25-litre containers, but it took a little while to work out how to do it. I'll talk more about that in another video. This chamber, we had an average of 5 people using it as their main toilet for almost exactly 2 years, and that's how long it took to fill up. That's 1 cubic metre. And like all the other ones, I put loads of worms in, and I think that does help to break it down quicker. We had a slightly higher average of people using this one, and we started using it in January 2018. And it's now September 2019. So I think that's about 20 months. A couple of other things we've done in this toilet. We have got some fine reading matter, Toilets from Around the World, great book. We have also twinned the toilet with another toilet, which happens to be in Uganda. The toilet twinning charity, you pay them money, about 60 or 70 pounds, which goes towards building toilets in places where they don't have them, and maybe where open defecation is practiced. Open defecation is where people just have no toilet at all. They go and poo maybe in the woods, maybe in the fields. And there are really big problems with that in lots of places in the world. One of them is hygiene. Obviously, any diseases that are in poo, you're at risk of touching them as you walk about and do your business, and then more people becoming ill. But also, particularly for women, if you have to look for somewhere private to go for a poo or a pee, it's a really risky thing to do in terms of getting raped and sexual abuse. So that feels like a good thing to do that anybody can do with their toilet. There's a really, really good film called Toilet, which is a Bollywood film, and is quite long. But if you can get through the Bollywood romance in the first half, the second half is a fantastic exploration of why it's difficult to get toilets installed in rural places in India. And it looks at it from all different angles in a fantastic way. So I definitely recommend it. We'll go around the back and we'll have a look at the back of the containers, and particularly this one, which I've just emptied recently, because you can see how big the hole is. And maybe take a look inside. This is the urine tank for the original house toilet. This is buried. You can see it's buried fairly deep. So I did have to bear in mind that if the water table rose and the tank was empty, it would lift it. And what I did to stop that happening is put in a pipe right down at the bottom there that drains away to a lower level there. So any water going in there is going to get carried away and it's not going to build up and lift the tank. It would not be pretty. Down here you can see the urine pipe is coming out from, well, inside there is obviously the toilet. The urine runs down, always has to be running downhill of course, and it comes into the tank here, and I have sealed it in. Actually looking at it, not all that well at the top, with a little bit of tape, so I might redo that. That's to stop the smells coming out, because obviously urine, when it sits around, really, really smelly, and you will be able to smell it even just from a little gap around the edge of the pipe. Now let's go around and we'll look at the back of the poo containers. This is the back of the toilet that we've been looking at. You can see the 2 chambers. I'm just going to uncover them. This is the one that is currently being used, the one that's very, very full, being added to now, and I'm going to switch over to another one soon. So this is the one that I was saying is a bit smelly when you take the lid off. What you can see here is that's the hole in the back. It's very full. I don't want to touch anything in there because it's too fresh. I've got the thing for raking the top off there. So I'm going to put this back on. Right, and leave that. This is the one that I emptied very recently. And this one, it's had no new deposits for about 20 months, so there won't be any pathogens. It should be perfectly safe. When I emptied it, it wasn't smelly. We'll have a look at what came out because it was quite interesting how it went. And I'll take that off. You can have a look in the chamber as well and see how it looks after I emptied it. I didn't get absolutely everything out, partly because my main aim was to get the toilet usable again, and it would be quite difficult to get every bit out. But if I empty the main volume, I can just carry on and keep using the toilet. I'm going to show you the tools I used. Very, very simple. Long-handled shovel. Went in, scraped it like that, and put it in there. And then I carried it off and I put it into 3 of the 220 litre barrels that we've already seen, but we are going to take a look at those. It was a little bit different. On the top it was a bit dry and hadn't composted down, but again no pathogens because it had been left for long enough. The middle a little bit less dry, and the bottom probably had a bit of moisture in there, so some of it was a little bit anaerobic. So in terms of the composting, it was all perfectly safe. It didn't smell bad, but it didn't turn into perfect compost in the way that the bucket system in the market garden, where I was emptying the buckets every year, that turns into really amazing compost quite quickly. So I think what I need is another stage with this. But the main thing is it took about 2 hours, me doing it on my own, emptying it after 2 years of being filled, and it didn't smell bad. So it was fine. It wasn't a really unpleasant job. So what you notice first is that the containers are covered, again, like the campsite one, with dark material, and that is to keep the chamber dark. The 2 reasons for that are, one, it's not that nice looking at poo. So when you use the toilet, it's quite nice to have it dark. And the second reason is that flies are attracted to light. So if you have a dark chamber and then have a chimney with light at the top, any flies that do get in there will tend to go towards the light. And as I said, we very briefly did have a fly problem with one of these containers. I can't even remember which one. And so we have now also covered the top of the chimneys with mesh. So it's dark, the flies look for light, they go on up the chimneys, they buzz around, they can't get out, they die, and that's the end of that fly. The other feature of the chimneys that I've mentioned before, but you can in some ways see it more clearly now, is that you get air passing more quickly over them, and the idea is that sucks the air out of the chambers from the back. So when you're in the room, the smells are being taken away from you. Obviously, you want to have moving air for that to happen, and the higher you go, the better the moving air. And what you'll notice about this one is it's not got loads of leaves around it like the other one, so it actually does draw a little bit better, but not if the wind isn't blowing.